oh, now I understand why houses have walls and rooms have walls. The real sort of pendulum swinging back saying, yeah, I need spaces, I need compartments, I need, closed off areas.
Well, think about college dorms then. Those are horrible.
I shudder to think.
Well, let's kind of formally start the podcast.
Yeah.
Welcome to Season 2 of the Vitruvian Man podcast. It's great to be back. My name is Vinamre Kasanaa. I'm your host. Last time we had the privilege of having some students who talked about their various interests in different fields in the arts, sciences, and so on. But this semester we're doing something different. We're bringing in actual professors who've mentored me, professors who've helped me explore different areas of academia and communications and thinking. So without much further ado, I would like to bring and welcome esteemed professor Mr. Michael Dowding, who's a master lecturer at Boston University, and he's been working in writing and advertising and public relations for about 25 years. A distinguished teacher. He started and established Wordscape Communications, which was a freelance writing consultancy dedicated to copywriting and public relations. And beyond that, he's also served as the Publicity Club of New England's president. And he's also been a freelance contributor to the Boston Globe, funny enough, because we were just talking about the article. So that's something that's close to your heart.
Yeah.
Do you read that every single day?
I think I read something from the Globe, I'm sure, every day. I don't ever advocate reading it cover to cover. I think that's just not the way I would ever recommend consuming information or news. But I did freelancing for the Globe. The bulk of it was probably from 86 or 87 until about 95, about 10 or 12 years. And I covered pop music.
Interesting. That's why you made us write those music reviews in class. So interesting context for the listeners and the viewers.
Yeah.
Professor Dowding made us write a music review, and the only requirement was that we engage with the album on our own individually without consulting anything online.
Yep.
The only exception would be if you were listening to a vinyl, you could read the back.
Yeah.
But that's about it.
Or you could listen to it on Spotify, but don't read.
But yeah, don't read. And if you wanted to find information about who was in the track, you would have to email Professor Dowding, and then he would do the internet research for you and then bring it back.
Keep your opinions clean. Keep your mind uncorrupted by anyone else's thoughts or opinions on the work.
It was a great strategy because I put that special article on my website as a portfolio.
Oh, good,
and I
good.
showed it to another professor. He was like, "This is brilliant."
Good.
And I'm like, "Yeah, well, because I wasn't distracted." So there's that. But you've been teaching writing and PR courses at BU, and I certainly had the privilege of having my mind changed about what writing means, because I came in as this sort of, I'm a writer who knows complex words and abstract things, and here's 7 things that I can talk about writing, and blah, blah, blah. And suddenly Professor Dowding is like, it's time to murder your darlings. All of this is horrible. You're saying...
I never said that word. Never.
Well, sorry I'm misquoting you, but that's the experience that...
Well, I'm sure that's how it feels.
Yeah.
It's
like I'm the benevolent sword that's going to cut through all your all the things that you value. And the result of that was I became so certain and precise with my words.
This is a good thing.
Yeah. So, could you talk more about how writing is, different from the writing that people tend to do?
Sure.
Communication writing especially.
And to anyone out there who's listening, first off, I'm very excited to be here, Vinamre. This is the greatest thing. And am I a season premiere episode?
Yes.
Oh, my God. All right. I am far more stoked than I was before.
Hell yeah.
So any of your listeners would know that if they've taken my class, that I always have to explain to them that, you're a student in the College of Communication. I'm freely going to admit that you're a very good writer. That's how you got here. But what makes the class, I think, a bit of a challenge is that I ask them to sort of walk away from the tools that they've used to become successful to that point. So everybody walks into my class and they are pretty darn good at, cranking out a sociology term paper or a psychology essay. And they've mastered, in many instances, the academic voice. Well, it turns out that when you get into media writing, that's not what we want. And, the arts review that you mentioned a minute ago is a good example because, so many of my students are used to writing critiques or analyses about, a short story or a book or something. And they use that voice and they take that approach. And that's not what we want. We want something that's entertaining and engaging and, pleasant to read and not just sounding stiff and formal. So it's funny, but, a lot of students have initially will have trouble moving from that academic voice into a media voice. And it's very difficult because I'm almost literally asking them to let go of the things that made them successful and sort of take a blind faith walk with me through the semester so that when we get to the end, you're going to have a new set of tools. Yes, you're still a great composer of words, but you've got to use a completely different approach to master this media stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you say that because in academic writing, the template is just so firm.
Yeah.
It's that, okay, well, you have a thesis statement in the paper. And then after the thesis statement, you have 3 points that support that.
Yeah.
And then you have maybe 1 point saying, well, the counter-argument is bad.
Yeah.
And in the end, you have a conclusion summarizing the points.
Yep.
It's almost like there's a math to writing. And once, especially if you're someone who's logical and rational, it's like, oh, I figured out the math.
Yeah.
What you can then do is the first sentence can be a neat rephrasing of your thesis statement or the first supporting point. The rest of it can be absolutely garbage.
Yeah.
And because the professor, not to say that that's exactly what happens, but because we're so used to seeing, is he or she rephrasing the point that he made? Well, yes, then let's give him some points.
Yeah.
And that sort of takes away the responsibility for actually trying to engage with the arguments fully,
Absolutely true. It's difficult when you've been, again, not only spending, years and years of your life mastering that structure and format. And I find, by the way, that's particularly true with my international students, even more than my U.S. students. But when you've been mastering that and you've, really nailed it and you've been rewarded for it, and now I'm saying, what are you doing? Don't do that. It can be very unsettling, I think, to students, and that's understandable.
So as for finding your voice in media writing, because that's something that is still like an ambiguous term for for most of our listeners and stuff, because it's like people think of writing as a broad thing. It's like, oh, I write my thoughts out, or I write my opinion about something.
Right.
How is media writing different from not just academic writing, but the whole idea of writing as a whole?
I think there's an increasing emphasis on brevity.
Okay.
In media writing, the footprints in the holes are smaller and smaller. I find in my freelance practice, somebody would ask me to write a lengthy 2,500 word paper about some technical topic. Now, they just want the word counts shorter and shorter and shorter. If I'm sending an email campaign to for a client, they might have 90 words, maybe 95 words, and that's it. And
really?
It's highly structured. So you talk about your structure with your thesis statement and supporting points. They've got something that says, okay, we want 70 words here, 15 words here, 10 words here.
Wow.
And that's that's difficult for me because I have so much that I want. Like my students, I have so much I want to say, and I don't have room to say it. And so that's been a challenge for me to sort of adjust to.
Right. Well, then that brings me to my next question to you. Is that one thing that I noticed with when I was attempting to be successful at your class was that you had to keep in mind that this is a brand, and that this brand has a set of principles, a set of a vision that it sort of puts out in the public, but it also has a voice. So you have to keep all of those things in mind and say that I'm writing from that angle, as opposed to this is me, Vinamre, and here's my thoughts.
And I'm glad you brought that up, Vinamre, because that's exactly sort of what I think one of the cardinal principles of media writing is you're writing, most often, I certainly am, writing for someone else's voice. You're writing to help somebody else communicate a message to a third party. And so you've got to do a great job of sort of, getting inside their head and sort of understanding what they want to say and helping them find the right way to say it, how to say it. In academic writing or just many other forms of writing, you're writing for yourself in your own voice, and you don't get that luxury, I think, a lot of times in media writing. You've got to you're doing it for hire, you're doing it for somebody else. It's commercial-based work as opposed to the memoirs of what I'd like to tell you about myself.
Well, talking about memoirs, let's go down memory lane right now.
Sure.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about. So, I mean, you're from here in Massachusetts.
Yes, I am born and raised in Massachusetts.
Okay, so what is it that sort of compelled you to take this path of the writer?
That's a fun question. I can tell you because I can tell you exactly how it happened. It's weird, but it's how it happened. 8th grade. I was, taking an English class in 8th grade, and my teacher assigned us a term paper. You had to pick an American author and do a term. And this was literally, in 8th grade, teaching you a term paper skill that you would use throughout high school and college. So it had a very important purpose to it. And I chose Robert Frost. And I can still remember, reading the poems and writing, the index cards and building the outline and writing the term paper. And I may have some writing talent. What I don't have is typing talent. So I can remember, I was 13 years old, and my mother helping me type up the paper, which fortunately was not disallowed. That was that was okay as far as the teacher was concerned. And I remember, she was finishing the typing, and she just turned to me and said, "You're pretty good at writing. This is really good."
Yeah.
And I would largely tell you that, I thought maybe I'll do that for a living. It was sort of what I would do. And so I went to college, and I majored in English because that seemed like a good idea. And so I did. And my first years, I studied Shakespeare, and then a couple of years later I had to do a couple semesters of romantic poetry and all these kinds of fun things, and never really thought about it. I just knew that I liked to do it, and it kind of came not easily to me, but it came to me a little more easily than it does to other people. And I had no idea what I was going to do with it, from a career perspective. But then I had an internship at a software company in their PR department, and I was writing news releases. I was helping them write their annual report, and I was doing well. I liked it. And
that's when you said you would have to type the news releases on a typewriter.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
If you made one single mistake, you would have to type the whole thing back. Right?
IBM Selectric 2. Yeah, that was the IBM Selectric 2 typewriter. We did have these little, I don't know what you'd call them, little sheets that if you had a misstrike, you could put it in there and pop it out. But, it was you typed much more carefully in those days than you do now. That's for sure, right?
Yeah.
And so, I did that, and they asked me to stay on full-time while I finished my education at night. And so that's when I actually came to BU, because I was mostly through my undergraduate degree, but finished up at night at BU, finished my English degree here, and then continued on and figured maybe I'd directed to journalism. And so I got my graduate degree in print journalism here at COM. And but that was a part-time basis. I was sort of working in the world at the time, and gave it serious thought to actually maybe taking a career in journalism. And I actually had an interview for the Globe for a full-time position. I was a finalist, didn't get the job, and in retrospect, that's just grand. It's fine with me. I'm very happy with how things came out. But continued with the PR career and worked with different companies, and then I actually went back and got an MBA in finance because I knew Shakespeare and Robert Frost, but didn't know how economics or how to read a financial statement, and I wanted to sort of balance out that business side of my brain. Then, in '95, I decided to go out on my own and just start a freelance writing career, and I also started teaching here at BU back then on a part-time basis. So, it's funny because between my schooling and college years and teaching, I like to tell people I've been in a classroom on one side of the desk or other every year since 1967, except for 3 years. Since 1967, I've been in a classroom every September.
So you can't wait to get in because they just beckon to you. It's like, Michael, come
I always tell people Labor Day, September 1st feels like New Year's Day to me. Like that's when the year starts for me. January 1st is more arbitrary, but September 1st feels like there's a real rollover effect and there's a new year starting.
That's so funny. I do want to pick your brain on something you said. You said that I wanted to balance the other side of my brain out.
Yeah.
So a lot of what this podcast is about is essentially whole brain thinking, It's like the arts and the sciences. So oftentimes, and this is something that literature majors tend to do, is like they tend to be heavily, and because I was also fascinated with the classics, they tend to be heavily invested in always the abstract, always these models of reality that have to do with characters and fiction and emotions, right?
Sure.
But then, a degree in finance, which is so like left brain, which is so like, or it's the right brain, I don't know.
I can never keep those straight either.
Yeah, it's just so complex. But that's so analytical, logical, and has to do with the real world. So I guess my question to you is, why did you decide to make that switch?
It's funny because I was, working in these software companies and tech firms, and I was the writer guy, and plenty of work to do there. Because fortunately, there are not many people that understand computer software and writing that can write well. So I had a good niche to attack from a career perspective. But what I noticed was, the guys that were getting promoted, they had business degrees.
Interesting.
And I realized, when a business discussion would break out, about accounts payable or our financial statements, our balance sheet, I wouldn't hold up my hands physically because I didn't want them to know I didn't know. I'd kind of do the nod, It was not a good look. And then I decided that maybe the way to get ahead would be to shore up this massive gap in my knowledge, which I'd never taken a business course before, and I had a graduate degree in journalism, and it just seemed like a logical thing for me, and I was interested in it. So I went back to Suffolk and Suffolk University and enrolled in their executive MBA program, which is a Saturdays only deal.
Yeah, I've wait staffed at some of those at BU as well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And it's, I was young. I was probably in my early 30s and didn't have kids, so I could somehow find a way to do this, but it was exhausting. You were in class 48 Saturdays a year. You got once every 11 weeks they'd give you a Saturday off in between terms, essentially. Yeah. And it was a great thing to complete, but it was really harrowing to go through at the time.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because some of the people that I met at the executive MBA program at BU, they got so bored of seeing their classmates and they started coming and talking to me. Because obviously, me as a wait staff guy had something more to offer to the conversation. They were like, look at this person. He's so detached. He's just serving his food. Let us see what is up with him.
Yeah, the good call on their part.
Yeah, but so, you've been teaching at BU for so long. Yeah. What's the one thing that sort of still strikes you as either fascinating or quirky or weird about the students that come to your classes?
I guess sort of the commonality that I see, and this will sound schmaltzy and cheesy, and I don't care, is that the students that come into my class, they're just great kids. They really are, and they're bright, they're motivated, they want to learn stuff, and by and large, I try to sort of tap into their energy. And I try to have fun in these classes. It's
Halloween.
Halloween. We'll get to Halloween. That was a classic. But we have a lot of fun, but we learn a lot. I know that I work my students very hard. There's a lot of assignments.
That's the first thing on the syllabus.
Yeah.
This is going to be a hard class. That's
exactly,
what he's saying.
Exactly. What is it? It's like a 40-page syllabus, right? So we're not messing around here. I kind of want to make sure that everybody knows what they're signing up for before they get neck deep in it. And, every now and again, somebody like, don't think I want to do that. And they bail out, and that's fine. That's their right and privilege. Yeah. But I think the commonality, the thing that always endures is just how much enjoyment and pleasure I get out of doing this work. The standard joke I always trot out with my classes is, I do this for free, but don't tell them that, because it's so much fun. I just love being in the classroom and just, working with a bunch of young writers trying to get better. It's just a lot of fun.
Talking about young writers trying to get better.
Yeah.
What is your advice to them? Because, certainly, and not everyone has had the privilege of going to Boston University and learning from you, and then saying, okay, well, I've become a better writer thanks to Professor Dowding. So for someone who's listening and who says, who thinks that they have something to say, but they don't know how to say it or articulate it exactly, where should they start?
Let's start even earlier than that. Let's start with being a voracious reader. Okay. I think that the best writers are, by and large, the most voracious readers. It's probably one of the most underrated, undervalued ways to improve your writing. Yeah. And, it's like being a musician, there's no musician that you can think of that says, oh, I hate concerts and albums. I hate listening to others. Like, I just want to work on my own. Like, no, you get engaged by reading other people's material, and it gets reflected in your own writing, whether it's, you learn stuff that, you end up using, or you absorb some of their style sort of at a subconscious level. But I think that's the most important thing. And then, it does come down to, do you have something to say? And if you don't have something to say, step away, because you won't say anything. And so I think it's important, have something to say, master what you're going to talk about or write about, so that you're, have enough expertise to write about it knowledgeably and informatively and persuasively. So I think those are good starting points.
It's interesting that you say that, because one of the things you have us do in the class for the longest time is to get familiarized with a vacuum cleaner. And, as an aspiring writer who's coming in bright-eyed into your classroom, is like, I'm going to learn to write about these Pepsi or Coca-Cola, or maybe learn how to write for fashion.
Yeah.
The first thing you sort of put in their faces, you will learn every bloody thing about this vacuum cleaner. And it's hard because, you might think, because I go to BU or because I'm in liberal arts, I must be open-minded. You're not. You're so close-minded to the idea. You literally look at it with so much, almost like resentment. Like, oh my God, why is Professor Dowding making us do this?
Yeah.
But the fascinating insight that I got out of it was, so that being a voracious reader also means that reading stuff that you might necessarily not like.
Yeah.
Or stuff that you have nothing to do with.
Yeah.
Because it helps broaden your perspective.
I tell my students, and I get pushback on the vacuum. Let's be honest. The ElectroZoom XL is my favorite of all time, and it always will be.
The best, the first, or the only?
First best only. What's first best? Do you remember your first best only? You will be a hero if you can trot this one out.
What is it? The first vacuum cleaner that... It was the first. I know that. It was the first. Or maybe it was the only. I don't know. Do you remember all the first best onlys?
It was the first industrial strength consumer vacuum. Yeah. Now it all comes... For those of you who can't see, unfortunately, he's just thrown his head back in disgust and humor at the same time, because when it comes back to you, it's like, PTSD. Yeah.
It's like, I don't know what my duty is anymore. I don't know who I am. No, but yeah, you were talking about how, I forgot.
No, we were saying, how students don't necessarily really love the idea of a vacuum, and it always spurs me to point out to them, guys, when you go to work at that ad agency, it's not going to always be the sneaker account or the pizza account. You're going to have, and frankly, it always sounds like I'm tooting my own horn or sort of rationalizing this, but I hear from my students afterward, years later, and they'll say, the vacuum's not that bad. I wish I could work on a vacuum right now. I'm working on some industrial tubing account or something, Wow. So, a consumer vacuum is a pretty good account. It's not bad. But like you say, when it's, sophomores coming in here thinking it's going to just be, I'm going to work on the Ben and Jerry's and I'm going to work. It's like, well, not always, so it's a bit of a shock to them.
That's what I think my own limited interpretation of writing is. It's a lot about sacrifice. It's a lot about sacrificing stuff.
You're putting your voice aside and adopting somebody else's, and you're going to get paid to do that. It's not without compensation. You're doing that because they're paying you to do that, and because you do it well, and you say the things that they want to say in memorable and engaging ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that you say that, because I do want to talk to you about, you still have a pretty, industrious freelance career, and you worked on companies like, Sun Microsystems and some fintech companies, as well as some companies in, medicine. And
sure.
So since you're working for so many different companies and you're just one person, right? How do you manage understanding or sort of keeping in your head, well, I have to write this about this company, or the press release for this is that? How do you manage all of that?
Yeah, it's tough. You see a big list of clients on my website, but
super big.
But they're not all active, obviously. So some will just go away for a while, or sometimes they just go away permanently. Because generally I work on a project basis, so they've got something they need me to work on. I do, and maybe they've got something 2 months later. Maybe they got something 2 weeks later. Maybe they got something 2 years later. It just varies, and that is one of the challenges, is trying to figure out, what's the next priority. How do I keep all these people happy and manage the deadlines and sort of juggle things? And it's time management. By the way, a great skill for a college student to learn as well with their different classes. It's the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's not dissimilar. So
yeah, I didn't learn that in your class. I'll tell that you for a fact, because I have such shame around the fact that I would always email you extension.
For the record, he was never granted an extension. I want to make that clear.
Yes, never. Because here's the thing. It's like, you think you can get away. You think that you can exploit the system, but it's just not practical.
It's unrelenting.
You're not learning how to function in the real world when you're saying, well, because I'm a softy little baby, I couldn't focus because I got sick. It's like, I empathize with you, Vinamre, take this extension. So, no, finally, I'm proud to announce, Professor Dowding, that I have not asked for a single extension.
Might be the most valuable lesson you took away then.
I mean, I don't know, but
you can't go to your client and say, "Hey, I really wasn't feeling good yesterday." It's like, suck it up, Buttercup. Let's go.
Yeah,
the world's still moving.
Yeah, and so interestingly, so people are coming in and people want to write and stuff. What's the hardest truth that you've had to absorb about writing?
I don't know if I can. Let me answer it slightly differently, which is, it's counter to a lot of things they've learned. Like, they've learned to pad things and me to work. I got to add some more things in here to get to this 20 pages or whatever. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, people want shorter lengths, but it's more of a case of, to get that, you want something short and tight, and it actually takes longer amounts of time to write shorter documents. Yeah. And it's that Mark Twain line, I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have time. So it requires a commitment to the craft, and it's not like riding a bicycle. It's not like something you can just pick up that you haven't done in a while. It's like being a musician. It's like being an athlete. It requires you to practice the right way every day. And I think that's how you keep your chops if you're a musician. It's how you constantly stay in tune, because you're doing it every day. You're doing the right way every day. So it becomes that principle of do it right, and do it right now. And when you get to that level,
let's try to make a clip of that and put it on Instagram. So we'll get a lot of likes for that for sure.
As long as it's not accompanied by my photo, I think you probably will.
No, but one of the things that you sort of said in the notes was, you can be smart and not a good writer. Yeah, but
I think that's true.
You can be a good writer without being smart. Could you talk more about that?
Well, it's funny, because I know a lot of super smart people. They're just not great writers. But that is not to diminish their intelligence at all. In fact, that's sort of the basis of my freelance practice. I work with smart people who are not really good at writing. Thank God they're there. They help me feed myself, But I also would tell you, if you're a great writer, I know immediately that you are smart. Because and I'm not saying this out of some sort of self-love of, how great smarter I am or whatever. Yeah. But if you can write well, then you have to be smart, because you can't write well unless you're smart, unless you're really, focused, and you're reading stuff and you're retaining things and you're able to, synthesize different data points. That just doesn't happen.
So one thing that I think is so interesting, and this is the sort of perception that I came in with to your class was, Professor Dowding is relatively elder to me. So how is he going to teach me about contemporary writing or contemporary social media writing or social media copywriting? Sure. But you have the most active, what's the right word? The most active Twitter account as compared to all my contemporaries. Right? You're on there all the time. You're putting out your opinions. So, why did you decide that was something that was important? Not because the culture was saying it, but how did you adapt to that from being a traditional writer?
It's a great question. It's funny because I appreciate those comments. I don't think I think I could be much more active on Twitter than I am. But, Facebook? No. As I joke, I go on Facebook religiously every year. Once a year, to thank you for those birthday wishes,
Yeah.
and from people I don't even know. And I think I have an Instagram account. I've never posted on Instagram, but Twitter to me is just kind of like that. Sort of fits my style, my preferences, the things I like. I can scroll through it fast and get updates on what's going on in the world. I can occasionally chip in with a comment or two or retweet, and that to me it's the right pace and tone for what I prefer.
Yeah.
And when it is in that mode, the writing for it comes naturally. I sort of observe how people are using that. And what did you think when they doubled the character limit from 140 to 280? Did that really hit your radar?
Listeners, this is a classic example of when you think you're a smart millennial and then you get fooled, because I did not know about that.
Yeah, that happened a while ago, though. So it's not recent news.
Okay.
But they doubled their word, footprint.
Well, I think it's interesting that Twitter is basically an embodiment of your philosophy toward writing, which is like you only have 140 characters, so it better be good.
Yeah, keep it short, keep it sweet, keep it clear.
Yeah. But I didn't think much of it. I don't actually actively use Twitter because for me, my poison or my way of communicating is Instagram, because I've been really using video content and long copy and short copy and stories and content that sort of flashes in front of your eyes. It's clickbaity, like those email headlines that you taught us in class, right? Because if you just say, hey, here's an offer for you, and we would love to give you this, it's like the headline of the email is going to go in ... because you can't even read it.
Yeah.
Versus Urban Outfitters sends me an email and says, hey, here's the $50 we owe you.
Yeah.
You open the email.
How you're not going to open that, right?
Yeah. You open the email, it's an offer.
Yeah.
For, you can actually get a discount if you do this thing. But they made you open it.
Yeah.
So my question then to you is, you talk a lot about precision writing and writing that sort of appeals to people and is engaging and is pleasant. What are like some of the ways in which people can be better writers like that? Or maybe I guess the question is, how can we write like the people who did that in Urban Outfitters? Because that was something that.
Well, I think that's that email you described just sounds like a lot of talent happening right there. That's a really clever way, and I think a lot of the effective things that you see, let's just say marketing emails, right? They're just so relentlessly tested. These guys are doing these A/B splits of this headline versus this subject line versus this subject line, and testing them and seeing what draws a statistically significant greater number of clicks, and so then they say, okay, let's put dollar figures in the headline, or so all of these things just get tested time after time. So they're applying a lot of science to this. I mean, sort of science, right? To see what is going to be the thing that draws the clicks. And I think that's what these companies are striving to do, is just eke out one little more advantage, two clicks more, whatever it takes.
I want to ask you the universal question that I'm sure anyone who's an aspiring writer is thinking about right now.
Okay.
I want to say these things, but I'm stuck. I have a writer's block. What do I do?
Yeah. We don't even like to say those two words, WB. We don't.
Are they condemned? I'm sorry. I'm sorry, my speech was so problematic. I apologize.
You never let that word phrase into the room, right? But does it happen? Sure. And I think what characterizes it is the writer is trying to solve the entire problem at once, and it gets overwhelmed by it. Like, I've got to write a news release. Oh my gosh. Well, no, just say I got to write a headline. Let's just start there. So my solution to that problem is just chip away at it, even if you have to go away. Like, if you're sitting there and you're blocked, don't sit there any longer. It's not going to suddenly happen, I don't think, in many cases. The ways I like to go, chip at it, put something down and come back later, even if it's an hour later, come back and look at it again. And then when you're working on this, throw things up on the screen, just unfinished thoughts. Just, all right, I need a quote here. I'm going to have 3 bullets. I'll put bullets here. Let me look on my sources, and okay, I want to get this fact in there. This quote is going to go here. Just throw things up there as raw materials.
Yeah.
Lego bricks, a pile of Lego bricks. You just figure out what bricks you want. Then you worry about assembling them and making your sentences clean and tight. But just organically grow it, bit by bit, and stop looking at the entire piece. Put your head down and focus on this one section. Get the first phrase, then get the first sentence. And that's all. Don't try and solve the whole thing at once.
Yeah. One of the things that really helped me in organizing my thoughts and, combating or sort of taking on these longer writing assignments was the art of free writing.
Oh, sure.
Which means, for listeners who don't know, is whatever you think about it, whatever the length is, you just keep writing relentlessly without judging yourself. And then you look back at it, it's like, okay, well, it's not exactly what I expected, but here's 5 or 6 insights that I can then use to construct a smaller argument or make it more effective, right?
That discipline works really well if you're willing to do that second part. If you're willing and have the fortitude to relentlessly hack apart what you've written and say, all right, I need to get rid of 80% of this, but I'll take the top 20% here and use that. And that's a great way. Now it's a pretty long way around the barn. Like you got to write a lot of stuff that is never going to see the light of day.
Yeah.
And for some of us, that's a real difficult sort of thing to get over.
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest misconceptions about writing include, writers just sit down, write the words, and voila.
Yeah, it just happens.
It just
the
happens.
magic enters the room.
Yeah. I read this book, Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott.
Okay.
It's like a pretty famous writing book, and she talks about, well, you think that I don't have bad days. Like, there's a looming sense of anxiety at all times because I have to, write that bloody thing, and people think, oh, Anne, that was perfect. It must have been so easy for you. It's like, you don't know. I had to bring in demons inside my head and have them, wreck my whole psyche and then build it up again so I could write that.
It can be painful. You don't remember him. He was a great professor here. His name was Jack Fallow.
Okay.
And
I haven't.
he unfortunately passed away about, I think, 10 or 11 years ago. And he wrote a couple of books. He lived out in Natick and he taught sports journalism here. And so he was a big hockey fanatic. And he wrote a book, I think was called Home Ice, and then he wrote a second one, a sequel called Open Ice. And I was talking to him one day about it, in email, actually exchanging emails, asking him how the writing process was going. And he said, I'm pounding it out through the tackles, which is a football analogy, where you're just grinding it out.
Yeah.
He said he was writing maybe 200 words a day. And I just really depressed for him, hearing that stat, just such a low. Well, then, you read the books and they're just fantastic essays about hockey. And you just, wow, okay, well, it was worth the effort because the result was just so stellar.
One of the things you talk about in your class is finding your voice, finding your writing voice. Yeah. And that to me seemed like a paradox at first. Well, because I'm writing for this brand, what's my voice?
Yeah.
But it's like, well, then in the arts review, it became slightly more clear. It's like, what do you mean when you say you find your voice? So, I mean, could you talk more about that?
Sure. I mean, the arts review is one of those great places where you do get to sort of really develop your own voice. And it comes early in my semester anyways. So in some ways that's unfortunate, but it's sort of the reality of what we need. But, you want to find your particular way of saying, it's like cooking. Everybody, anybody can cook chicken parm, I guess, but, everybody does it differently. This is how I do it. I melt the cheese first before, whatever, Yeah. So you want to find your own style and make it your own. And some of that, by the way, still comes from reading, reading and absorbing other people's styles and sort of, I like the way they did that. I like the way she did that. That sort of approach is essential. But getting the right voice, even for somebody else, that's a real trick. And so you're adopting the brand's voice, and you're going to do it, frankly, by reading a lot of their previous materials and sort of watching their ads and reading their ads and their news releases and blog posts, whatever. But you sort of get what their tone, their attitude is, their manner of communicating. And then you've got to sort of imitate it in new ways. And there's a lot of imitation, but not just solely imitating, but innovating as well.
Yeah. That's where the phrase "steal like an artist" comes from.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, because I used to place a lot of faith in Hunter S. Thompson, but then I grew up and I was like, this guy's
he's crazy.
He's crazy too much. But one thing that is still admirable about him is he said he learned how to write by rewriting The Great Gatsby 50 times.
Oh, I never knew that. Gatsby is probably my favorite novel.
Right. So it's like
that's great.
You can see that, okay, maybe he has no talent, but it's like if I just rewrite this whole novel, what I'm basically doing is I'm imprinting the words, the ideas, the theme in my head.
and making it come out your own way.
Yeah, yeah.
Fun.
So, I mean, I was fascinated by that, and I started doing that with a couple of books, and I could see that, okay, well, my speaking style is more scientific and prosaic.
Yeah.
Like, it comes from the books I've read and tried to rewrite again and again.
It's who you are.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a fantastic practice, but, considering that we do have to stop in about, like, exactly 5 minutes, I just want to pick your brain on you're this fork in your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
They often say the writer's life is one of solitude and starvation. But here you are sitting with us, looking fantastic.
Reasonably well fed.
Yeah. And you're glowing and all things are good. So
thanks.
How have you been able to, merge the two elements of the practicality of feeding yourself and your life, but then also taking on this chaotic, sometimes not that rewarding endeavor of writing?
Well, there's I guess the other dimension, which is also teaching as well.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So
right,
think
right.
of it that way. It's funny because when I started my writing practice, it was 1995. The internet was around, but it wasn't too common. And it was just really the right time to start a business where you could work out of your house. Like working from home was kind of an exotic concept then. And people would say to me, "Geez, Michael, you work from your house." And I'm like, "Yeah." Like, "Well, where do you work?" I'm like, "Well, we built an office over the garage. I work from." "Oh, you did?" And then they'd confess to me, "If I worked for myself from home, I'd probably just sit and watch MTV and eat all day, and I would never get anything done." And what I found was the exact opposite. Like the work, I don't want to say it became an addiction, but it became a very strong obsession. Like I got to get stuff done. I got to get up there. I got to work. And it was, people would say, "How do you do that?" I'm like, "Well, do you like to eat?" Because like I got a couple kids, man, and they're pretty committed to the whole eating idea. So I gotta have some cash coming in here. So, it was never a question of oh, this is gonna make me lazy. It was the exact opposite. I was like, I need to take some time away. I got to step away. And what was great too is that at the same time I started this teaching gig.
Yeah.
It was part time. It was 1 or 2 nights a week. But it was just the perfect balance for this solitary life of writing. And then, as I would say, at 4 o'clock, I've got a reason to shower and shave and put on a necktie and go talk to some people. So it was a great counterbalance to the solitude of writing, and then this very social aspect of talking about writing with a bunch of young people. It was a great balance. I was always happy to have that fortune.
What I get from that is, if a writer is alone without a family and just by himself, he needs to find something that gives his life meaning. He needs to find something that he can do as a day job, or he needs to find something.
You can't be otherwise you're Ted Kaczynski or something.
Yeah,
right?
He needs to build a family, because then it's like, well, then I have a reason to do this thing.
Yeah.
I can't just do it as a passing fancy. It's
right.
like, I love to speak about things, but I don't have any reason.
See, I've started to write a novel. I started 10 years ago. All right, so it's still not done, and it's that same sort of thing. It's like it has to have a reason to happen, and it's like I'm interested in it. I love it. It's a great experience, but at the end of the day, there are other competing priorities that fall a little higher on the list. So, but it's that same thing. It has to have a reason to be.
Hell yeah. Well, Professor Dowding, this has been fantastic.
Thanks. I've had a blast.
Thank you for being my first premiere guest. I think when I put it out, some sort of garlands and flowers are going to come to my house.
I'm a season premiere. I'm just going to take that and dine out on that tonight,
My parents are going to probably, run a parade in the city, and I think my dad is going to get a new haircut. I think life is going to change. I might meet God tonight, so I don't know. Things are looking pretty good. But thank you so much
Pleasure
for
was
being
all mine.
here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
This is Michael Dowding, my professor and my greatest writing teacher that I've ever had in my life. Thank you so much. This was the Vitruvian Man podcast. Before we exit, I do want to ask you,
here it comes.
Where can people find you?
Oh, well, that's an easy question. Okay. You can follow me on Twitter at mgdowding.
Okay, we'll put that up on the screen.
My website is www.wordscape.com. There's no L in there. It's words and cape. Wordscape. And then my email, sure, mdowding@bu.edu.
You're going to have some stalkers.
Drop me a line. I'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. So if you have any, if you have any sort of, if you need help with writing, if you want to reach out, this is the great man that taught me how to write and murder my darlings, which I so fancily loved. So this was a conversation with Michael Dowding, and I'll try to see you next week. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Vinamre.
Thank you. Hell yeah.
Yeah. Good times.